Great, hi there. So I'm Ian Biddle, and I'm going to be giving the lecture this week on class. So I just wanted to give you a brief kind of introduction to what we're going to be covering. Class is a funny term, one that a lot of people have ignored for quite a long time in music studies. It's a little bit more commonplace in popular music studies, but still there's quite a bit of discomfort with the notion of social class. So what do we mean by class? Well, as we'll see in the lecture, I guess part of what we mean by class is the idea of a group of people who share an economic interest. So, we think about the so-called middle class, a very English term, which has a very specific UK resonance. By the middle class, we tend to mean people who have an education of a certain kind, usually university educated, and work in the professions like teaching or doctors or lawyers or what have you. But there's a whole other set of definitions of class which are much more complicated than that, and they come from a tradition put in place by people like Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels. Class for them is really whether you have to work or you don't have to work for a living. So all of those of us who have to work for a living are members of the so-called working class. But if you have enough money so you don't have to work, then you are a member of the so-called bourgeoisie. And that's quite different to how we think about it in the UK. So that just goes to show you that what class is and what it means differs from place to place and from moment to moment in history. In musical terms, class is really helpful because it helps us understand something about who likes what kinds of musics and why. What we don't want to start doing is kind of imposing a kind of predetermined notion of what people from a certain class are going to like. But sociologists and ethnographers have found that your economic position, whether you're living in a very precarious or a very secure economic position, has profound impacts on the kinds of musics you listen to. In the 1990s, we were given a sort of way of thinking about musical preferences called the omnivore thesis. And the omnivore thesis is an idea that everybody likes lots and lots of different things. And that was the idea that we felt that, a multicultural society was leaning to, so that, in the end, everybody would have an enormous music collection and would have a very wide taste preferences. But recent studies have shown that the more precarious your economic position, the less likely you are to have access to a wide range of musical materials, so that the likelihood is the more limited your access to the internet, for example, the more that you are on the wrong side of the so-called digital divide, the more likely you are to be a monivore. In other words, that you are likely to like one set of music rather than lots of different sets of music. So even at that level of taste, of preference, we can see that class has a particular set of things to tell us, which can be quite useful. Another reason for thinking about class, of course, is that class helps us understand the consequences of poverty or of privilege. It helps us understand the language of those particular groups, of how they view the world, how one group misunderstands another, or how one group exploits another. And in musical terms, this is shown all the time in terms of some of the ways in which access to commercial music, for example, is limited to certain kinds of class groups. And also how different kinds of image and language use are used to address different markets. So the marketing engine, if you like, of the big labels is very, adept at understanding class. And so, although we might be uncomfortable about thinking which class we belong to, that's absolutely fine. It's still a useful tool for thinking about the relationship between music, privilege, money, and so on. So that's really what I'm going to be talking about next week. I'm sure you'll find it helpful and interesting, and I look forward to hearing your comments.